What is happening, lads? Hope you are good. We are back at the whiteboard, and today what we're looking at is the aerobic system, and this is crucial, especially this time of year as the rain is pissing down here in the off season. It's really important that we develop this, because this is the base for everything else we do. If you do not have a solid aerobic base, then it's very hard to operate at higher intensities like sprinting, like anaerobic running, so higher intensity running. So if you do not have that, then it's going to be very hard to have the capacity to do anything else. So this is probably the best opportunity to develop this, because it is quite time consuming. I'll show you a few different ways that we can look at doing it a bit more efficiently than maybe old school ways, but again, this is fundamental to everything else we do. This is similar to our hypertrophy, in which we talked about last week. If we don't have this in place, then it's going to make your speed, your higher intensity work a lot more difficult, and puts you at a greater risk of injuries and blowing up halfway through the season. So the analogy that I like to use is the Yaris versus the Ferrari. The Ferrari can be looked at like the anaerobic system. That's going to be used for short bouts, but really high intensity, and it can only last a short amount of time. But again, it's going to operate at faster paces. If you like to think of the aerobic system as our trusty Yaris, it's going to have a huge fuel tank, it's going to last for a long time, and it's going to operate at lower intensities. So this is more sustainable energy versus the Ferrari. Whereas with the Ferrari, you can go fast for a really short period of time, and you can operate really well in that, but then it's going to be finite. Your batteries are going to go flat after a while. You're going to run out of fuel for that. Your Yaris, however, is going to be longer lasting, because it has a bigger fuel tank there. So essentially that's because the aerobic system is more reliant on fat rather than carbohydrates. The Ferrari, the higher intensity work, is going to be really reliant on carbohydrates, and that's why your fuel days, your carb loading days, are really important for higher intensity exercise, for like the likes of GA and whatnot. But again, as we're doing aerobic system conditioning, it will look at more fat-based exercises, because you're going to be operating at lower intensities, where the energy fuel is going to be reliant more on fats, okay? That's all well and good, okay? So that's just the overarching, I suppose, thesis around aerobic system development. How can we train it? So there's a couple of different ways. First things, we're going to start off really easy. We're going to look at extensive intervals. These are just timed runs at a specific heart rate, a max heart rate, okay? So this is going to be timed runs at whatever percentage your heart rate is going to operate at. I would recommend between 60 to 70% of your max heart rate. Again, you're going to be looking at aerobic capacity, which is at the lower end, so that's more 60 to 70%. And then you're going to be looking at more anaerobic threshold work or aerobic power work. So there's two branches. The aerobic power work, or anaerobic threshold, is going to be a little bit higher intensity, so that's going to be around 70 to 80% of your max heart rate. So if your max heart rate, you do 220 minus your age, that's your max heart rate. Then you multiply that by, let's say, 70% or 80% or 60% in these examples, and that's what you're going to be trying to average throughout your runs. So again, extensive intervals, very straightforward. You can do something like 5 by 5 at, let's say, if you're working on capacity, let's say 60% of your max heart rate, or if you're working on threshold work, maybe 80% of your max heart rate, okay? Second one then is fartlek training, okay? So maybe you've heard of this before. The Swedish refer to it as speed play, and essentially it's just going to be varying in the same set. It's going to be varying between, capacity work and anaerobic threshold work, or aerobic power work. So for example, you can do a 6-minute set, okay? So one run at six minutes. 3 minutes can be at capacity work, so that could be at 70% of your max heart rate. And then for the final 3 minutes, you can do threshold or power work at 80% of your max heart rate. So in one set, you're going to vary between the two different aerobic systems, okay? So the aerobic capacity and aerobic power, you're going to vary that into one set. That essentially is going to be fartlek training. The third one then is going to be long, slow distance running, LSDR. And this is your standard, what everyone was doing over COVID, just a long, steady state run. Very simple. You're going to do that at a specific target, whether you're going for capacity, power work, whatever it is, something like a 30-minute steady state run. Very simple, very straightforward. That's long, slow distance running. Again, not the most time efficient thing, which I will get on to with mass running, which is probably the most time efficient way to train this system. But long, slow distance running can be included throughout your season, especially now in the off season. If it's something that you enjoy, there's no reason why you can't include that once per week. I wouldn't rely on it the whole time because, again, it's not going to be really that practical for team sports. But again, you can include it. The last one then is mass, and that's maximal aerobic speed. So essentially what this is it's the lowest speed at max oxygen uptake. So it's the velocity at which you can run at off your VO2 max. Okay, so it's very, very practical, and because you're running at quite high intensity around that VO2 max, that's going to be very, very time efficient because you won't have to run as long as, let's say, your long, slow distance running. So generally across the research, 120% of your mass, which I'll show you how to work out now in a second. 120% of your mass is most effective for around 15 to 30 seconds. How you can work out your mass is essentially do some sort of aerobic tests, your bronco test, your yo-yo test, work that out. Generally the bronco is easiest to work out here, so you can use a bronco test and then you can find your mass. So let's say you have a 4-minute 30 bronco test, okay? How many seconds is that in that? So to work out our mass, we need distance and time. Distance in meters and time in seconds. So how many seconds is in 4-minute 30? Let's say 270 seconds. And then we find our distance over time. So a bronco test is 1200 meters. And then we divide that by 270, which is our time. And then that will give you 4.4 meters per second as your mass. So your mass is 4.4 meters per second. Okay, so what can you do with this? Well, the easiest method here that we can look at, and there's plenty different ways that we can train mass, but the easiest way that I find and that we can break down this video is called the Eurofit method, okay? And essentially, this is 15 seconds on at your 120% of your mass. So you're going to multiply your mass by 15 seconds, which is the time. Multiply that then by the percentage of your mass, so 1.2, and that's going to give you 79.2 meters that you have to cover in 15 seconds. And you're going to take 15 off, so 15 seconds rest, and you can repeat that for as many times as you want. You're going to generally something like 6-8 reps, rest for 2 to 3 minutes, repeat, okay? So again, you want to multiply your mass by the amount of time that you're working, multiply by the actual intensity that you're going to work at. So if you wanted to work at 100% of your mass, then you would just multiply that by 1. But again, we're going to opt for 120% because that has been shown to be most effective. So you multiply that all together, that's going to give you your distance, and then that's the target that you want to be aiming for. So you want to be aiming for 79.2 meters or 80 meters for every rep. You want to make sure that you hit that cone. Whereas if you had a lower mass, you might have to go for a shorter distance, or you might have to go for a longer distance. So that will vary, that number at the end will vary. But again, it's all based on your bronco test or your aerobic test to work that out, okay? So that is a full picture. I've condensed that down very, very quickly. But again, there's lots of different ways that we can train our aerobic system, not just our long, slow distance running that people love to think is the only way we can train aerobic system. We can do plenty more, and especially over here, using mass is going to be one of the most time efficient ways to do it for team sports, and also the most practical because you're going to be running at higher speeds. You're going to be operating at more, I suppose, realistic speeds compared to games, compared to the likes of GA and etc. It has a better transfer over to our aerobic power, which is a little bit higher than our aerobic capacity, and that's generally where we're going to be operating in games, okay? So yeah, hopefully that was helpful. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions around any of that. I'd be more than happy to shout, or I'd be more than happy to get back to you on that. But again, if you have any questions, you want to book in for a chat, just check out the link below and we'll get back to you, and hopefully you have a great week.